The coroner's flashlight revealed her frozen stare first, then the bruising across her throat, and finally the torn denim soaked in November ice. A 22-year-old woman left beneath the railroad trestle, arms stiff. Snow sealed over her like a coffin no one dared open, that frigid Midwest morning still echoing. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the channel. The story of Lauren Bishop, a senior at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, began with a sudden disappearance that local news treated as another tragic Midwestern winter missing person case. She vanished on November 18, 1986, after her shift at a downtown bookstore. Temperatures plummeted to record lows that week, gusts off Lake Michigan hollowing the streets, pushing commuters inside. Police believe she simply got caught in a storm, lost her way, succumbed to hypothermia. But the autopsy later told a very different truth: manual strangulation, defensive lacerations on her palms, contusions consistent with restraint. There was no snow in her lungs. She had been killed first, placed in the cold after. Milwaukee detectives, overwhelmed by rising homicide rates and limited forensic tools of the era, worked the basics. Last known location, coworkers, her fiancé, neighbors in her Lower East Side apartment building. The canvas yielded little. Lauren was described as quiet, reliable, a literature student who preferred notes in the margins over nightlife. No enemies, no recent conflict, no stalker. Surveillance footage was rare in 1986. Most shops kept nothing but handwritten ledgers. Witness memory became the only lens, blurred by fear and winter darkness. A bartender thought he saw her cross Ogden Avenue alone near 9:40 p.m., hands in coat pockets, head down against the wind. A cab driver insisted she waved him off, saying she could walk. None of these accounts held firm when pressure mounted. Within weeks, the trail froze harder than the river. When her body was discovered on December 1, schoolchildren had noticed boots protruding from a mound of ice beneath the Kinnickinnic River trestle. The earliest responding officers slipped on sheets of frost, preserving what they could, but the scene suffered. Snowplows had passed days prior. Salt mixed with runoff, distorting footprints. No tire impressions remained. Fibers that might have mattered were washed into drainage channels. The crime scene report read like a list of lost possibilities. The autopsy at Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's office revealed precision in the violence. Her hyoid bone was fractured, consistent with forceful strangulation. Bruising patterned in parallel lines on her upper arms suggested she was held down by someone significantly stronger. No sexual assault was confirmed, though beneath her nails, the examiner extracted microscopic traces of skin, far beyond what 1986 labs could analyze with certainty. It was saved in a paper envelope, labeled filed, nearly forgotten. Media coverage erupted in cycles. Lauren's parents, visiting from Racine, appeared on evening broadcasts holding her framed graduation photo. Reporters pressed detectives about leads. Police offered none. Winter turned to spring, and Milwaukee moved on. The case settled into the cold files, its box sealed and stacked among hundreds on metal shelves. For 13 years, it remained there. Occasionally, an academy trainee or new detective would reopen it, skim pages, note the same dead ends, the same missing chain of evidence. The skin cells beneath her nails were too degraded, they were told, the technology too primitive. In the late 90s, DNA science began catching up, but backlogs and budget constraints pushed cold cases to the bottom. Only priority homicides with known suspects received testing. Lauren's parents died within 4 years of each other, never learning what happened in those final minutes. Her younger sister, Maria, moved west, built a quiet life in Portland, and stopped responding to Milwaukee detective requests. The case aged without witnesses, without advocacy, without urgency. Then, in 2016, a grant from the Department of Justice allowed Milwaukee PD to send decades-old biological evidence to advanced private labs. The envelope containing Lauren's fingernail scrapings traveled from its dust-covered box to a climate-controlled FedEx container, bound for a facility in Quantico specializing in degraded DNA. Analysts used next-generation sequencing, rebuilding fragments so small they once would have been discarded. After 30 years, a profile emerged, not partial, not speculative, but full, clean, and matchable. When the CODIS search returned a hit, detectives stared at the screen in disbelief. The DNA belonged to a man who had lived 3 blocks from Lauren's apartment in 1986, a man never interviewed, never suspected, never named in reports. Harold Hal Kessler, a tow truck operator with misdemeanor arrests but no violent record. He died in 2009 of cardiac arrest. His prints were in the system from a 1982 DUI, and his DNA was uploaded posthumously due to a Wisconsin backlog reconciliation project. Detectives revisited every available record. Kessler's employment logs showed late-night roadside calls near the University Strip. He frequently drove along the route Lauren walked. His former neighbors described him as solitary, eccentric, someone who collected scrap metal in his yard. No one remembered him interacting with Lauren, but police reconstructed the geography: her path home, the lowest lit stretches, the proximity to his garage. The evidence alone did not reveal motive. No robbery indicators. Her wallet remained in her coat, her watch on her wrist. No pursuit pattern could be proven. It appeared opportunistic, a moment dictated by darkness and isolation. Cold cases rarely deliver narrative, only fragments. Once Kessler's DNA was confirmed a second time, the department called Lauren's sister. Maria listened in silence, then asked only whether her sister had suffered long. They told her the autopsy suggested quick unconsciousness. It was the closest Milwaukee law enforcement had ever come to mercy. The district attorney publicly closed the case, labeling it solved though unprosecutable. Archived news outlets revisited their old footage, airing split-screen comparisons of the recovery site then and now, the trestle rusted, graffiti-scarred, redevelopment edging in with coffee shops and new condos. Milwaukee had changed. The river looked cleaner, but winter still felt the same. Forensically, analysts noted the grip bruising on Lauren's arms matched Kessler's estimated hand span, and the angle of compression around her neck matched pressure produced by someone his documented size. His tow truck manifests indicated travel on her route at exactly 9:41 p.m. A timestamp written in smudged ink across a carbon sheet recovered from garage records. The city acknowledged the failure of 1986 investigations, insufficient canvassing, poor evidence preservation, assumptions of hypothermia, weather disguised homicide, and homicide hid in weather. The cold had worked in favor of the killer, stopping decomposition, slowing everything except grief. Lauren's case became a brief training benchmark in Milwaukee PD seminars. Officers were instructed to treat every cold weather disappearance as foul play until proven otherwise. And they were reminded that DNA, even when it sleeps in envelopes for decades, can someday speak. Though solved on paper, the community never found closure beyond the scientific result. There were questions no lab could answer: how long he waited, whether he followed her or simply encountered her, whether she sensed danger or believed he intended to help. Silence filled those gaps. Milwaukee's skyline faded into winter again, as it does like winds cutting through intersections, sirens echoing over ice. Lauren Bishop's name remained on a brass plaque dedicated to unsolved victims, never updated after resolution, because bureaucracy forgot to engrave the final line. In many ways, that omission fit. Memory, like cold, preserves what it can and erases the rest. The closure Milwaukee officials announced in 2016 was administrative, not emotional, and certainly not cultural. As news spread, retired detectives who had handled Lauren's file in the late 80s re-emerged from quiet suburban lives, agreeing to interviews they had declined decades before. They confessed the same painful truth in measured tones. In 1986, the city was drowning in violent crime, cocaine-linked homicides rising, systemic understaffing pushing investigators beyond capacity. Lauren's case, though horrifying, didn't fit their statistical patterns. No forced entry, no sexual assault confirmed, no clear motive, no suspect profile. She was seen as tragic but not as the most urgent. The brutality of hindsight arrived with the DNA match, forcing the department to confront not only the killer, but the investigative blindness that let him remain invisible. The internal review revealed that Hal Kessler's tow truck logs, the very documents that later placed him at the approximate time and location of Lauren's disappearance, had technically been available in 1986. But police hadn't subpoenaed them because at the time, officers believed she simply collapsed in the snow. That assumption, born from weather reports and misinterpreted scene conditions, redirected an entire homicide. Her frozen state mimicked hypothermia. There were no fingerprints on her coat buttons, no clear fibers around her neckline, no intact trace evidence along the trestle. What did exist had been taken by the cold, washed by melt, scattered by salt and plow. Lauren's sister, Maria, flew back to Milwaukee only once after the DNA confirmation. She toured the old neighborhood with a victim advocate, passing the now-modern bookstore replaced by glass frontage and LED signage. She stopped at the bridge where her sister had been found. The city felt younger, cleaner, unrecognizable. She declined media interviews, requesting privacy, but her presence alone stirred public sentiment. News outlets replayed archival footage of 1986 snow drifts swallowing police tape, grainy shots of the coroner van idling beneath steel struts, detectives hunched over clipboards. The director of the forensic lab in Quantico, who oversaw the DNA sequencing, gave one technical briefing. He spoke of how the cellular fragments extracted from Lauren's nails were so deteriorated that earlier generations of testing could not read them beyond ambiguous partials. He described next-generation sequencing as a kind of resurrection, not emotional, not narrative, just molecular. The same degraded sample that produced nothing but contamination warnings in the 90s now yielded a full genetic fingerprint, detailed enough to survive judicial scrutiny had Kessler been alive. Local radio reopened its Unsolved Mysteries Hour, dedicating an entire episode to Lauren. Callers recalled the winter of '86, the crisis-level cold that set record lows across the Midwest. A retired firefighter remembered slipping during the initial body recovery, his boot breaking ice that sounded like bone. He remembered the silence at the site, no city hum, no lake wind, only the static of his radio. The river, he said, didn't move that morning. It looked as if time had paused, preserving horror beneath its surface. The medical examiner's archived notes resurfaced, livor mortis fixed in a pattern indicating she had been moved post-mortem. Soil samples from under her boots didn't match the trestle terrain, but instead suggested she had died elsewhere, likely on pavement or cement. That finding was overshadowed at the time by weather interference, but modern analysts revisited it and concluded Kessler may have abducted her in a parking lot or side street, strangled her either in his truck or garage, then driven her to the river under cover of pre-dawn wind and lake fog. He would have needed less than 20 minutes. Former coworkers at the bookstore remembered Lauren's final shift, a closing night, a shipment of new literature editions, her handwriting visible on order sheets. She had walked out at 9:14 p.m. precisely. A streetlight outage near the intersection of Ogden and a store had been reported that same week, documented in city power maintenance logs. That outage created a blackout zone between campus and home, a corridor scientists later identified as ideal for opportunistic predation. It was not a planned kill, forensic psychologists concluded, but an intersection of weather, darkness, and a man with no restraint. Kessler's personal background surfaced in clippings. A loner raised in Kenosha, relocated to Milwaukee for steady mechanic work, never married, no children, no known intimate partners. Coworkers from his mid-80s auto shop recalled his unpredictable temper and odd fixation on damaged vehicles. He kept scrap metal sculptures in his yard, rusted frames wired together at grotesque angles. His landlady, interviewed posthumously through archived depositions, once mentioned he returned home at erratic hours smelling of gasoline and lake water. None of these details were dramatic enough to warrant a 1986 investigation, but in retrospect, they accumulated into a chilling portrait. Milwaukee's cold case unit used Lauren's story to push for digital evidence preservation reforms. The decades-lost potential of her initial crime scene became an argument for technology, body cameras, thermal mapping, AI-enhanced imaging, full-spectrum forensics. The trestle site today is monitored, the riverbank reinforced, but the memory lingers beneath its redevelopment. Even the graffiti artists leave a stretch untouched, a silent corridor. By spring 2017, the city held a memorial event. Weather was unnervingly similar to the day she was found: gray sky, quiet wind, lake air heavy but still. Detectives, forensic technicians, retired officers, and community members stood along the river. A chaplain read her name. No speeches, no dramatization, only acknowledgement. The final internal memo recorded one analytical note. Had Lauren's nails not scraped her killer's skin, leaving microscopic traces of epithelial cells, the case would have vanished entirely. Those cells, so insignificant at the time, became the only surviving witness 30 years later. Her body froze, her voice silenced, but her resistance preserved evidence. The science that solved her murder existed decades after her death, operating at a pace she could never have imagined while walking home that night. Modern criminologists studied her case to reinforce the principle that crime scenes are not static. They evolve with seasons, city development, scientific advancement. What once looked like an accidental winter death now reads as a precise homicide wrapped in frost. The snow had camouflaged violence. The wind had muted struggle. The bridge had absorbed screams no one heard. One quiet detail emerged in 2018 when an archivist digitizing old police audio recovered dispatch logs from the night Lauren went missing. A patrol car passed within 2 blocks of her presumed abduction zone at 9:45 p.m., responding to a separate domestic disturbance. The officer reported icy conditions, no pedestrians. Had the timing skewed by minutes, had headlights swept slightly left, had the blackout section been illuminated, Kessler may have been seen. Instead, city routine maneuvered around tragedy without awareness. Lauren Bishop's story remained not just one of loss but of forensic evolution. She died in an era when DNA lived mostly in theory, when laboratories took months to type blood, when matching profiles required miracles. She was solved in an era when genome fragments could be reassembled like glass, when cold cases thawed under algorithms. She became a benchmark in national databases, cited in DOJ grant guidelines, referenced in symposiums on evidence longevity. Yet despite official closure, the city carried an unspoken ache. Milwaukee winters still echo with the caution her case imparted. No disappearance is benign. No frozen body is assumed accidental. No envelope of degraded cells is dismissed. In the archives, her file no longer gathers dust but occupies a digital folder labeled Resolved Notable. The trestle remains, metal aging, river moving, wind carving patterns over water, repeating the same sound it made the morning she was found, unchanging in its cold indifference. The DNA match that named Hal Kessler as Lauren Bishop's killer closed the evidence loop, but opened a quieter, more unsettling space in Milwaukee's collective memory. The solved file meant there was no perpetrator to prosecute, no courtroom catharsis, no cross-examination to reveal motive or timeline. It left the case suspended between scientific certainty and human incompleteness. In the years following public closure, the city grappled not with who killed Lauren but with how a life could end in plain sight of a downtown corridor and remain technically unsolved, unacknowledged, and unremembered for 3 decades. Her name faded from active headlines, replaced by anniversary blurbs and small segment mentions, until a new forensic milestone occurred. In 2021, a cold case symposium at the Wisconsin State Crime Lab included Lauren's file as a keynote example. Slides displayed her original autopsy photos, the trestle site, the bagged scrapings beneath her nails, and the sequencing charts that reconstructed Kessler's DNA. The presenter emphasized that Lauren's case represented the essential tension of forensic history. Science evolves faster than justice, evidence survives longer than memory, and victims wait longer than systems are designed to hold. The audience sat silent, some retired detectives recognizing not her case specifically, but the era, snow-thick winters, budget cuts, and investigative triage. Lauren was one of many whose stories stalled not from apathy but because tools simply did not exist. A quiet revelation surfaced in late 2022 when Milwaukee City Archives restored damaged microfilm reels containing 1986 patrol call logs. Among static-ridden transmissions was one brief notation. A woman's scream reported near the Ogden underpass around 9:35 p.m., dismissed by dispatch due to wind interference. It was a common winter error. Lake Michigan gusts can mimic human distress over radio channels. That call, unheard beyond dispatch, aligned with Lauren's last sighting, her path home, and the blackout zone where the streetlights failed. It was proof not of negligence, but of how a city's noise and weather can swallow an entire life in seconds. Retired homicide investigator Thomas Greer, now living outside Madison, agreed to one final interview in 2023 before declining public comment permanently. He had reviewed Lauren's file only twice in his career, both times overwhelmed by the absence of workable evidence. What unsettled him most, he said, was the precision of her killer's opportunity. Kessler did not stalk, did not hunt, did not enter a building or shadow her days. He existed within her route, like the river and the bridge, waiting in the geography rather than the narrative. Lauren met not a pursuer but a moment. Lauren's student thesis draft, recovered from university archives during a digitization initiative, contained an underlined passage from a 19th century novel. The cold does not erase, it preserves, and in preserving forces us to remember. Her handwriting curved across the margin, steady and neat. Professors remembered her as analytical, gentle, introverted, someone who annotated rather than argued. She was weeks from finishing her degree when she was killed. Her bookshelf, catalogued by the property clerk in 1986, listed worn poetry, battered classics, and a note from her sister tucked inside a composition notebook. "Come home for Christmas early if you can." She never answered it. That detail surfaced in 2024 when the Bishop family donated Lauren's academic belongings to the Milwaukee Public Library's archives. The exhibit lasted only 2 weeks, understated, placed between campus history and local newspaper timelines. Visitors paused at her final exam schedule, her penciled reminders, her grocery list noting apples, tea, and bus fare. No sensational framing, no dramatic lighting, just the life of a young woman who walked home on a freezing night and never arrived. In national cold case discourse, Lauren's murder served as both warning and threshold. The scrape beneath her nails, a reflex of terror, yielded the DNA that would outlast not only her killer, but also every investigator assigned to her case. Forensic analysts used her file as demonstration material for evidence retention standards, arguing that no biological trace, regardless of degradation, should ever be discarded. She became a symbol not of tragedy but of preservation and patience, proof that a single cell can hold the weight of decades. The bridge where she was found was scheduled for renovation in 2025. During planning, engineers discovered that the original steel beams still bore faint markings from the police scene spray paint used to outline evidence zones in 1986. Those marks, dulled by rust and weather, remained visible enough to halt construction for a morning. Workers stood back, not from superstition, but from quiet respect. The city ordered that a portion of the trestle be retained in its original state, untouched metal, facing the river, cold wind moving through its ribs. That same year, Milwaukee PD's cold case unit received additional funding, and investigators re-examined dozens of files once dismissed as weather fatalities. Lauren's case had changed protocol permanently. No winter death is ever processed as accidental without full forensic exclusion of foul play. In training manuals, her name appears not beside the term victim, but beside the word catalyst. In the final municipal record update filed at the end of 2026, the official disposition line reads, DNA confirmed homicide, perpetrator deceased, no prosecutorial remedy available. It is clinical, accurate, emotionless. It leaves untouched everything that cannot be measured. Her last walk beneath failing streetlights, the scream lost in wind, the snow settling over her body before morning. Milwaukee winters remain relentless. The lake still freezes along the same edge Lauren crossed. Students still walk along Ogden with backpacks and headphones, believing their route is familiar, safe, uneventful. Most will never know her name. But when the air sharpens and the river quiets beneath ice, the city still recalls in its own silent way that a young woman once died in darkness there, and that the cold, instead of burying her, preserved the truth that finally spoke. Lauren Bishop did not become a headline or a cautionary tale or a symbol of investigative failure. She became what the DNA finally allowed her to be, identified, acknowledged, and no longer missing in the eyes of a city that once looked away. The evidence that solved her murder slept longer than she lived, and yet in waking, carried her out of silence. Milwaukee moved forward, buildings rose, streetlights brightened, cameras multiplied, and the trestle rust continued its slow decay. But the wind along the river in the exact corridor where she once walked keeps its memory sharp, unsoftened, and enduring.